This episode brought to you by How to Write Manga, your complete guide to the secrets of Japanese comic book storytelling. Available wherever fine ebooks are sold. Hi all, Rob here. This is the after-show conversation Don and I had with guest Michael Monahan after the official show recording had stopped. Michael was a fascinating and charming guest, and we easily could have talked to him for hours about horror hosts and some of his other passions, if dinner and other things hadn't come calling. As it was, we talked for another hour and a half, and what you're about to hear is an edited down version of some of the highlights of that conversation, which, by the way, had so much good stuff in it that it's actually as long as an episode by itself. If anyone is listening to this who hasn't heard episode 27 about the American horror host phenomenon of the 20th century, then you might want to go back and listen to that first, as this is kind of a follow-up to that episode, and it'll make a lot more sense that way. Anyway, sit back, relax, and let's return to the world of horror hosts with Michael Monahan. Enjoy.
Oh, I gotta ask. You mentioned a YouTube reviewer in Britain. That wouldn't happen to be the Dark Corners guy, would it?
No, it's a fellow by the name of Mark Kermode.
Okay.
And I had a friend of mine who was in England who was sending me various tapes, including some of the Nina stuff, over time. Mm-hmm. And we were also big James Bond collectors. So we were doing some of that trading. But there were a series of movie specials that were hosted by Mark Kermode on like Alien and The Exorcist in 2001, Clockwork Orange. And I just found him to be this really kind of exciting combination of not fanboy, but genuine fan, mm-hmm. and also really educated. So he wasn't just, talking out his ass. Right. And it was a really interesting combination of energies to me. And so he does a weekly program on BBC 5 with Simon Mayo, a radio program. And so a lot of his film reviews and some of his interviews are posted there. But he also has a side blog called Kermode Uncut, mm-hmm. and where he kind of more free forms about various topics, in cinema. And I disagree with him on a few things, but for the most part, he's the guy I go to for information. Even when I don't agree with him, I trust his opinion. I know exactly where he's coming from when he's saying it. But he's really, he's just terrific. And so I really enjoy those. I also, lately been looking up some of the history of horror stuff that Mark Gaddis was doing and mm-hmm. things like that I've really been enjoying as well.
Right, yeah. Mark Gaddis has a great love for horror.
Yeah.
It must be really hard sometimes. We didn't get a chance to discuss this on the air, but Don, you saw I forwarded you some of the email exchange where Michael sent me about one of the horror hosts passed away earlier this week, Chili Billy.
Yeah.
And that must be one of the harder aspects of doing this, because a lot of the people we're talking about are now have either passed away or they're somewhat elderly or seniors at this point. And so you're getting into this, but at the same time you're watching many of them pass into history.
Yeah, and that, again, a really good point. And actually, when I'm sorry, I know I tend to go off on tangents in the middle of the conversation, but I wish this was an aspect that we'd had a chance to talk about in the course of the interview, which was that we got lucky with the American Scary Film, the way that we timed it out. We got interviews with a number of people who passed away by the time the movie came out, and or soon after. But of the people that we spoke with, Mila Nurmi's gone, Bob Wilkins passed away, and Bob had Alzheimer's, which made it that much more difficult. In the interview that we did, we were lucky that his friend Bob Shaw was there, and Bob had worked with Bob Shaw had worked with Bob Wilkins at KTVU for decades. Bob actually got him a job there. So Bob Shaw was able to prompt him on certain things, and that was helpful. Alan Millar, who was Dr. Enoch Whitty, he also passed away. There was a fellow we didn't get a chance to interview, who was M.T. Graves in Florida. Oh, Bob Carter, who Sammy Terry, he passed away, and we didn't get a chance to interview him just because the production of the movie was out of pocket, and he was in the Midwest, and basically, if we had been able to organize an interview with Rich Coase in Chicago, we could have justified the expense of going from Chicago to Indianapolis and interviewing Bob Carter. But we were never able to nail down a date for Rich Coase, and so we missed him, and we weren't able to go to Indiana. But I was an invited guest out to Indiana for a convention that Sammy Terry attended, so I did get a chance to sit down and talk with him for a good stretch of time. We talked for about half an hour before he was going out, and it was wonderful. And after, and afterward, the people who had done the convention had gotten in contact with me and asked me if I could help them with a plaque that they wanted to give to Bob Carter and his kids after Bob had, gone into an old age home. And so I just wrote something out for them. I said, look, use what you want out of this, cut what you need, And so they said, no, this is perfect. They put it on the plaque, and they told me later, they gave it, Bob was too ill. He couldn't make it. But the kids were there, and he said they were crying when they were reading the plaque. And, so for me, as a real fan and follower of this stuff, that meant a lot. And meeting these and getting a chance to meet these people face to face, and just meant so much. I remember when Sandy and I went to Syracuse, New York, to interview Alan Millar and Mike Price, who was Baron de Moon in that area. We went there thinking these are minor hosts, because we didn't know too much about them. I really didn't know too much about either of these guys. So we just said, well, we'll just do this. We've got the time. We're going to be in New York City for Zachary and Commander USA, so it's not too much further. We'll just do it. No expectations whatsoever. Both of these guys were so charming. They were the best. There were two. I got a chance to meet Vampira. I got a chance to meet Zachary. These were really, really exciting things for me. But really, my favorite interview was sitting down with Alan Millar and Mike Price. They were just the nicest people, and they just exemplified local TV. And they knew each other. They're buddies. They had worked at different stations. Mike Price was still doing a little show on his, doing a segment on his local news show called The Good News. So he was still in broadcasting, and it was just, it was perfect. It was just so wonderful, and yeah, and then Mila Nurmi was just crazy wonderful, and Sandy was interviewing her, getting all the points that he wanted for the movie, and then he turned it over to me because he knew I wanted to ask about all kinds of other stuff. And so he and I went off talking about Kafka and Erta and dance and all kinds of other things that had nothing to do with that and it was great, and we just had such a great time, and she was notoriously difficult, and you can never really count on where she was going to be emotionally. We got there, she couldn't have been more charming, and we were laughing and joking, and at one point I was saying, hey, look, I've read any number of articles on you about the cultural impact, about the character of Vampira, blah, blah, blah. I've never read anything about the actual production of your show, the nuts and bolts. And she said, that's because nobody's interested. We're the first ones to ask. And so we got all of that history, and that's probably the first time.
Huh.
You know, so that all of that just meant so much. And here's the thing, and this goes with very much with Chili Billy as well as all of these other people who've passed. And I think I mentioned in an email, it's just basically, these were old pros. Right. That's what I got out of all of that. You know, it's like, these were the pros. And that, you know, and you could feel confident with that. They were comfortable. You know, there was, you know, when you're, you know, when you're a genuine pro, all those sort of ego issues don't seem to come up as much because you're confident in what you do. And that's what I got from a lot of these folks.
Huh.
Wow. Yeah, so I guess it really was a great time. You picked a great time to make the movie then. Wow, that's fantastic.
I've got a large collection of horror host costumes and posters and postcards and various knickknacks from, you know, frisbees to keychains and just Morgus the Magnificent to Mardi Gras coins and props from Dr. Paul Bearer and just all kinds of stuff. And you know, when it's my time, when I'm kicking, all of this stuff is going to a broadcast museum, and I'm thinking Chicago right now. They seem centrally located, and it's where so much of the stuff on that coast is where so much of the stuff came from.
Yeah. Well, I'm surprised they don't have a place, horror host museum in Cleveland. It seems like the most natural thing in the world.
Yeah. I had a friend who was trying to get one started up at one point years ago, like back in the early 2000s. He was he was more a dreamer than a practical person. But it didn't happen. But they do have other kinds of broadcasting. I'm sure the horror host and the Ghilardi thing is an aspect to their Broadcasters Hall of Fame and stuff like that. And they do have a lot of conventions out there. And there's one specifically, the Ghilardi Fest, every year. You know, and Big Chuck and Little John and Houlihan comes in from Florida. And the first convention they had, they brought in Superhost, but he's not traveling anymore.
He's quite elderly now, isn't he?
Yeah, he's of an age. But they do keep that stuff alive out there, and in a way that maybe some other cities don't. You know, you can go to Detroit and talk about Sir Graves, or you can talk about the Ghoul or even Count Scary or whatever. You can find knickknacks in the antique stores, but it's just not the same sort of cultural thing as it was in Cleveland, and a lot of that has to do with a static population. One of the things that Chuck and I talked about, I mentioned, I said, basically, Ghilardi came on the air in 1963 in January. So it's winter in Cleveland. You got 3 stations, and it just seems to me that, you've got a captive audience.
Yeah.
And that's why so much of it had a larger impact on the East Coast, because people were huddled up during the winter in a way that out here in California they're not. It's a different viewing experience. So people had a chance to get locked into this stuff. And then Chuck pointed out that at the same time, multiple generational families, granddad still lives in the same town as grandkids, and so you've got more of that through line. The population doesn't move around so much. So the people who watched Houlihan and Big Chuck when they were kids, are bringing their grandkids to Ghilardi Fest to meet Big Chuck. Because everybody grew up with it, and
Right.
the Chuck and John show was on through the early 2000s, 2007. So you had families who were watching that together. 3 generations could be watching the same show at the same time.
Right. Huh, that makes sense. That definitely makes sense. I mean, and Superhost, we're going back to him when he was on, who I watched in Cleveland, was of course on Saturday afternoons.
Right.
He started from my weekly schedule when was built around his 12 o'clock. He started showing Laurel and Hardy sketches and Three Stooges, and they'd do that for an hour, and then from 1 to 4 he would show 2 slightly hacked up B movies.
Right.
And that's how it was. And so it was a very much an afternoon family Saturday afternoon phenomenon, at least for Channel 43 there in Cleveland.
Yeah, and isn't it interesting that the very same movies that were that the stations were concerned about in the late 1950s, concerned enough to put them on in late night television, would be afternoon family movies by like less than 20 years later.
Yeah, they would be, and some of them were definitely still horror movies.
Yeah. Oh, well, he showed Frankenstein and the Wolfman and Dracula. He showed the Universal stuff.
Yep.
As well as Attack of the Crab Monsters.
Attack of the Crab Monsters, Horror Party Beach, Attack of the Giant Leeches. You go down the list.
Oh yeah. That was that to me. That was one of the things growing up in the mid '60s, especially with black and white TV. When I was a kid, that black and white TV was a real equalizer, and if you were a kid who loved monsters, you could see Attack of the Crab Monsters or the Giant Leeches the same day that you saw Bride of Frankenstein. And on one level, they're all monster movies, and I think that helped me, really honestly helped me be less judgmental about films, because when I was a kid, I liked Attack of the Giant Leeches. And once you start to explore, the technical quality of Bride of Frankenstein, you can appreciate what's going on technically in something like Attack of the Crab Monsters. Like you start to make sense of something that's fully realized and something that's kind of holding itself together. And that's just another way of appreciating something that is being done on the fly. I mean, Attack of the Crab Monsters, in a sense, it's like there's something that matches a host for you, because it's all seat of the pants. You got, on the one level, of course, it's planned, but on the other, it's like mistakes will happen. You just keep going.
Yep. Oh yeah, that's the way it works, huh? I hadn't thought about that, but it's true. It really would make you appreciate the good stuff much better.
Yeah. The first movie that gave me a nightmare was Bride of the Monster.
Really?
Yeah, and I can tell you specifically what it was, because it's stuck in my brain all these years. I must, to be honest, I mean, it was like I was 4 years old at the time. But there's a shot of the octopus and the guy flopping around in the little puddle with the octopus, screaming his guts out. And it's the fact that it's a single key light above the octopus, which just highlights the outline, a person screaming in this dark pool. And it's just that combination of images woke me up screaming as a 4-year-old kid. So there's Ed Wood's target audience right there.
Right.
Is 4-year-olds. And but that worked on me. I've seen the movie many times, but I could tell you I did not remember a single thing about that viewing of the movie except for that one image.
Right. Huh. So, out of curiosity, what is Dr. Ghoulfinger? Did you actually try being a horror host yourself?
I did that for a brief period of time for a couple of reasons. I was talking with a number of people at the time who were working in public access, and there was a part of me that just said, hey, this looks like fun. There was another part that said, this is something that I really enjoy. This is something that I really appreciate. I would like to experience this. And so I created a show, and I did about 10 episodes of this thing.
Right.
And the interesting thing to me was when I started doing it, immediately, as I told friends, I'd have people just go, "That's great." And I started doing live events and conventions because I was in a costume. And when I would go, I would talk about, horror hosts in general, local hosts. It was great. There was one point I was doing a show in Oakland, and I mentioned Big Chuck and Little John, and from the back of the crowd, there was this big "Wahoo!" I said, I just turned. And I said, "You're from Cleveland? Cleveland by the lake." So it's like someone from Cleveland happened to be there,
Right.
And so I really enjoyed that. And then, but at the same time, it was never something I committed myself to. Like, hey, boy! And then the next step for me is to turn this into a real live grown-up TV show. It was just I was having fun, and I went to conventions here and in Cleveland. And I actually started getting mail from Cleveland because I was on the Son of Ghoul show, on his live game show a couple of times. And there was one week, in fact, it just worked out. I did the Cleveland hat trick. I was on the Son of Ghoul, Big Chuck and Little John, and the Ghoul show all in the same week.
Wow.
I don't think there's anyone in Cleveland. I'm serious about this. I don't think there's anyone in Cleveland who can say the same thing.
Right.
It just didn't happen. It just, for me, it's just how it worked out. But I stopped doing it for a couple of reasons. Not the least of which was the same people that I had been talking to at the beginning of the year who were doing public access shows, and I thought, oh, this is fun, and they're doing things with each other. By the end of that year, we're starting to claim that we're continuing the tradition. We're the legacy. And I just said, man, that's no fun at all. And then so I just stopped.
Okay.
Because I just thought, these people are taking this shit way too seriously. And I put on the drag one last time at the Horror Hound convention in 2011 when they did a tribute to Vampira, specifically because the guy who was doing it wanted to gather as many costumed people together as possible for this. He asked me specifically to do it, and he paid for my flight and my room.
Oh,
and
wow.
so if you come to the dance and they say wear the prom dress, you wear the prom dress. But that was the last time I did anything like that. But on the other hand, in a weird way, I haven't changed my email address or anything like that because it's also it has picked up a certain cachet just as an alter ego. And I love having a nickname. People call me Doc all the time, and that's fine. That's as far as I'm ever going to take any of that stuff. But Doc's a pretty cool nickname. I'll stay with that. Sure.
So you're not going to be Dr. Ghoulfinger at the horror convention that you're going to next weekend?
Oh no, not at all. No.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not happening. Yeah, and there are, again, a number of reasons for that. Not the least of which is just keeping that separation, keeping a clear, just a clean line between being in a costume and talking about horror host history. Again, it's like people will gather to someone in a costume a lot easier. And that's that's what I found as soon as I started dressing up in a costume, suddenly I was talking in front of large groups who who were coming to see people in costumes. But at some point it's like, well, am I a costumed guy who talks about this stuff, or am I an historian, a writer,
Right.
a researcher?
Mhm.
And that's really what I feel much more comfortable with. It's I'm a horror host
Makes
historian.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, you definitely are, sir. You definitely
Yeah.
are. Wow. Thank you so much for speaking to us. I mean, this has been a fantastic interview.
Mhm.
I really enjoyed this.
Oh, thank you, man. So did I, and thank you so much for reaching out. I mean, uh, I honestly, I do despair sometimes, with all of these, with the old pros going. It's like
Right, yeah.
who's here to be interested in this stuff? Who's going to remember this stuff? And so I do feel it's that much more important to keep that history alive. It's the same, I take comfort in knowing people are still writing about silent movies. People are still interested in Abbott and Costello,
Yep.
and on radio as well as in films and things like that.
Yeah.
And so people do remain interested. I mean, there's a generation that won't look at a black and white movie. That breaks my heart.
Yeah.
And but if you can find a way in, there's always a chance. A guy told me that he watches silent movies with his toddlers, and he reads the title cards to them. And to them, it's like they love silent movies because it's like a living storybook.
Right.
And so, that's cool. That's good. I like that part of it. So hopefully it's not just going to be a bunch of old geezers saying, back in my day, you really do want people to be like, wow, they did this in my area. They did this in my neighborhood. This is great. I love that stuff.
Well, I think there's definitely a real lack of appreciation for local culture.
Yeah.
Especially in the current generation, unfortunately.
Yeah, see, and you nailed it. See, I guess that's what I was trying to get at with the whole internet versus broadcasting thing. Is local history, just in general, just itself, really gets a bad knock by people all being more interested in Beyonce than in whatever their local version of Captain Kangaroo was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because one of the key things, and I'm sorry to go on, but I will let you go.
Go ahead.
But one of the key things about local celebrities is they were attainable.
Yeah.
They're attainable in a way like Captain Satellite. You could run into at the grocery store.
Right.
He would be doing an event, and you'd see him in costume at an event doing Captain Satellite, but you could run into Bob March, the guy who played Captain Satellite,
Right.
at a supermarket. And as a kid, that's attainable. I see this guy on TV, and here he is squeezing the melons, right?
Yeah.
That, that's something that's inspirational. Kids send in their artwork to these people for a reason. They showed them on TV.
Right.
So, and someone held up your artwork on their horror show or their kid show or whatever. The next day in school, you were a celebrity because all your friends saw your artwork on that TV. That's inspirational, and that goes back to things like people who grew up watching Bob Wilkins getting into the business. Bob did a live event back in 1998, and my wife and I went. We got there like 3 hours early. I said, we're going to be the first in line. Nah, we were 5 and 6 because the first 3 guys were from Industrial Light and Magic.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And they got there first. And so, that does mean a lot. I mean, it's the difference, again, between the Beatles on Ed Sullivan and American Idol. Beatles on Ed Sullivan, 4 guys with instruments, playing instruments. The next day, armies of guys and gals are going out, getting drums, basses, guitars, and starting their own bands. American Idol. You know, giant screens, giant flashing lights, big bands, you know, this huge arena and auditorium and people texting away. It's like, wait, you can't buy into all of that. Somebody else is telling you whether you're talented or not, and then you get up on the stage and they own the music, they own the stage, they own the they own the means of production. Yeah, I mean, that's it.
Yeah.
But, you know, the Beatles are in Ed Sullivan next, you know, within months. Garage bands all over the place. People are, you know, singing Beatles songs. They're writing their own songs, and some of them went on to be rock and rollers who they went totally legit, you know, and or they got into recording production. Things just happened with people, and again, you know, to me, something like an American Idol, it's a total dead end because it's all about the technology and the flash, and not about people actually playing music. And so the Beatles are doable. And you got suddenly, you know, you've got local dance shows with local bands on the dance shows, you know, as well as, you know, playing records, you know, the Doors or the Byrds or whatever, but they'd have a local band on as well. And a lot of these local horror shows and kid shows would do that as well. You know, it's like, you know, and their next gig was at the High School Hop, but you know, that's all local history, and it's all attainable celebrity, and that's what's missing. You know, if you're on YouTube and you just give it your best, you give it your all, you put everything into it, and you're outdrawn by a cat video. What does that do? You know, it's like you know, entertainment in a weird way. It's simple. You could be Noel Coward, or you can get punched in the balls. Both of them. Somebody's going to laugh, right? So, yeah, I just really like that idea of local is organic. I guess that's the root of it. It's like it's organic and it grows outward. And this other stuff is, you know, it's like it's Soylent Green. It's a synthetic product that's delivered to you. And some people, again, you know, do it much better than others. I love Honest Trailers. And, you know, I go on and look at Honest Trailers on YouTube, and those fuckers are pulling millions of views. And, you know, and then, but the next guy over is, David the Rock Nelson who did, like, you know, these home movie videos of, like, Devil Ant and things like that. You see a David the Rock Nelson video, and it was posted 2 years ago, and there have been 11 views. And you know at least 3 of them are David the Rock Nelson. You know, so you just can't, you just can't count on it.
Well, the internet reacts to either things that are very, very good or very, very bad, but it hates mediocrity. It hates everything in between. You know what? But you know, and it's like, I'm even as I was just getting ready to give you a full-throated agreement, like, absolutely, see, and that's what's wrong with everything. I remember telling you not too long ago, hey, I watched Bride of Frankenstein, the Dracula, the Werewolf of London on Asmodeus, and then I watched, you know, Agent for Harm, Jesse James Meets Frankenstein's Daughter, Horror Party Beach on Bob Wilkins. And boy, those are your highs and lows. And you know, as long as it delivers, I guess that's the thing. You know, a $200 million inert movie, you know, something that just sits there and makes you want to kill yourself from boredom, versus, you know, again, a $5 cat video that just delights you. It's like, you know, on the other hand, if you spend a lot of money and you come up with something that just makes me jump out of my chair, I don't care about the money. I'm jumping out of my chair. But it's it's the quality. It's what hits you. Don is actually a toy maker.
Oh, really?
So,
what? Like industrial or art?
I do it mostly as a hobby, But I got
Okay.
like a little injection mold setup thing in the basement and that for doing it.
Oh, wow, that's great.
Kinda. Once you get to that point, you just crank them out, and I do. So you run out of space.
Yeah, no,
His house basically looks like a museum for toys.
Yeah.
Oh no, that's wonderful. I have a friend who is a mask maker.
Oh,
And,
okay.
yeah, and he's worked solo himself, as an independent for many years. And he also spent some time just recently, in fact, working with one of the Chiodo brothers.
Oh, okay.
But he was a very, very popular mask maker just on his own with his company Bump of the Night. I'm not sure what he's calling it now, because he just recently returned to doing independent stuff. But it's actual business. But
Right.
it did start as a hobby, and I really admire people who are that kind of creative. I mean, for instance, I wish I knew how to sculpt and do and make, because I would make a Horror Host Hall of Fame action figure set basically, but I can't make a Zachary or a Gallardi. I got an old Captain Action figure that looks surprisingly like Ernie Anderson, especially when he put a beard mustache on it. And I cut the fuzzy foot off of some stuffed toy, and it's a perfect fright wig. It fits, and it's like, now I'm just looking for a doll's lab coat, and I'll have my Gallardi action figure. But that's as close as I get.
Well, I'm surprised that they aren't selling like a little Horror Host dolls at these horror conventions that you go to. I mean, they're perfect fodder for that kind of thing.
You would think. There was, I think it was. I don't know if it was a Mock Time or someone else. They did do a limited Zachary doll, limited run Zachary doll. There have been some marquettes of Vampira and Elvira.
Right, of course.
So those things, they do pop up occasionally, and I know someone did just a fan version of Commander USA. I don't know what sort of doll they adapted for it, but it was. I saw a photograph. It was actually, I wanted one. It really looked great. But yeah, beyond that, it doesn't seem that there's a real big. That's not a real big draw. Mostly it's smaller little statuettes or something like that.
Right.
I mean, fans do produce things, but they don't tend to be overly elaborate.
Yeah, because for actual sales, something like the Horror Hosts, again, because they were local, there's very few that have the name recognition. Because, say, doing an action figure, even if you're using a generic body, because a lot of companies will have like a generic body or generic format, it can be expensive. And if you can't move, like I think for a small company, if you can't move, say, 5,000 of them, and at that level, they're going to be selling for around, say, $40 or $50.
Wow.
Then it's not feasible.
It's not worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people won't want to collect that. They're going to want to play with it. So it doesn't have investor potential as a collectible, but it's something a lot of people would love. It's just you can't bring it down to the price point where people will be willing to spend the money for it.
Yeah. Again, you get some local sculpts and things like that, but they're mostly tabletop.
Yeah.
I had for a period of this really nice Sammy Terry sculpt that somebody did, but it was just a bust rising up behind a tombstone, and it looked great. I mean, it really looked nice. I can't remember how. I think must have gotten off of eBay or something. But I ran into the guy who brought me out to Indianapolis for the Sammy Terry event. He had been looking for one of those for years, and he was just gaga over it. And he's a really nice guy and everything too. And eventually, he managed to get it out of my hands. I mean, I kind of semi-regret it, but on the other hand, I got actual prop pieces from a Dr. Paul Bearer's skull from the show, which has these crystal eyes in it, which are really neat and very distinctive. I mean, it's clearly that's the original piece. We both know the guy that he got it from, who had gotten a bunch of Paul Bearer's material after he had passed away. So I got that, as well as a pair of gloves that Paul Bearer had worn in his character of Count Chocula, which Dick Bennick did before Dr. Paul Bearer at another station in the area, North Carolina, I think, or Virginia, and so that's actually really cool. I mean, those are real, genuine pieces of history that were used by a host on his show, versus this really, really adorable sculpt. And okay, I got it. But when I did see Sammy, I did get a couple of items autographed by him and things like that. So that also helps make up for it quite a bit. I mean, I've got my Sammy Terry stuff, so I'm happy about that. Yeah, I've got one of the spiders used on his last run as well. So, again, like I said, it really is. It's like a little TV museum in here, and when I go, this place has to go to a genuine TV museum.
Definitely. Yeah, you've got some real history there from the sounds of it.
That's the other piece of the whole history of horror hosts for me, is that they were part of history. They were really a part of history. Christopher Coffin talked about he was Reed Farrell. He was the number one DJ in the St. Louis area. John Kennedy was coming for a visit, and because he was the number one in the market, the CIA was using him to coordinate media in that area for the visit. And he met John Kennedy.
Wow.
And he said, he shook his hand and he said, the man glowed.
Right.
He glowed. And he also was a huge supporter of Elvis Presley. And he was working at a station that was switching from rock and roll to easy listening. And Reed was just arguing against it, saying, no, you don't want to do this. And they said, no, the kids will listen to what we want them to listen to. And they set up a media event with Reed the next day where he would smash a record on the air and say, rock and roll has got to go, and start this new programming. And they brought in media people and they filmed it. Right. And he said he was totally against it, had to do it because the bosses told him. And that clip, rock and roll has got to go, he said it was such an embarrassment because it showed up in every rock and roll documentary since.
Yep.
Yes, it did.
I've seen it. Yeah, I've seen it.
And but on the other hand, Elvis Presley came to town, and he knows all those people, and they know he was a big supporter, and they asked him to introduce Elvis, who was premiering his gold suit. It was the first time in concert that he was wearing the gold suit. And he said, so you go out on stage, you talk to the kids, and then when we give you the signal, Elvis will come out at the top of the stairs, come down, shake hands, you guys exchange a few words, and then you're off. And they said, perfect. So he gets out on stage, and there's a delay. So he's got to vamp with these kids who are just stomping and ready to tear the place apart. Right. And finally they give him the signal, and he says, and now, ladies and gentlemen, Elvis Presley. And he said, at that point, you couldn't hear another thing because the shrieking was so loud. He said, you ever hear the phrase wall of noise? That's exactly what it was. He said he could feel his skin tingling from the vibration, and he was being pushed back by the sheer sound and volume. He said, I did not stick around. They saw Elvis, he said, no way I'm waiting around for this, because the kids are rushing the stage. So again, they're all part, it's history. Yeah. And Frank Sheridan, Asmo was out here in chemo. Mm-hmm. He would haunt the ticker tape, the AP ticker tape. He was a news junkie, and so he was watching the ticker tape. Reports Robert Kennedy was shot. And so Chemo Television, which was a small station out here, was the first station in the Bay Area to broadcast the announcement because Frank Sheridan was a news junkie and hung out. You know?
Right.
And that's just, especially during that period of the 60s. These hosts, one of the things that I'm really interested in now is specifically for these shows, what happened when Kennedy was assassinated? How long was it until your horror host came back on the air, and what was he like or she like when they returned? Did they comment on it? Did they avoid it? Yeah. It just really, it was such a cosmically disruptive event. Right. How long did it take them to deal with it? And so I'm just really interested in that.
That would be something to compare to 9/11. After how like the comedy show host and the talk show host and everything, how did they deal with 9/11 in the following weeks or days?
Yeah. The Son of Ghoul had a live game show on at the time. The Son of Ghoul's House of Fun and Games, live game show. It was a trivia show. They had 4 phone lines. People would call in, and they would compete against each other with trivia questions that he would draw out of a drum. Real old-fashioned, really great, and probably the last live program like that on television. I don't know if there's anything like that, especially a game show happening now. As his schedule was working out for that period of time, the House of Fun and Games had a scheduled date of 9/12. And I've got the show.
Right.
He comes out. He's would have like monster posters and stuff in the background. It's replaced by American flags, and he's standing there. He goes, "Wow, hey group, man, what a tragedy." He said, we were making calls all day. Should we do it? Should we even go on the air? And we finally decided, man, we got to just push through. Yeah, we got to do this. And and there's some more of that byplay. And then they start taking calls. And people were almost treating it like a call-in radio show at that point, because they're sharing pretty much everything that you would expect. People they're shocked, they're sad, they're angry, and you're just and they're looking in some cases for a sense of community, and you heard everything, across the spectrum coming through those phones, and it was just such a perfect representation of what America felt like on November the 12th.
Right, yeah.
And they still played a trivia game. In amongst all of that stuff, he was still reading trivia. What was the name of Samantha Stevens' neighbor on Bewitched? That type of thing. And at the end of it, people would get a prize. They might get a good prize, which is a meal to Rossisi's Italian restaurant, or they might get a can of Eeny Weenies.
Right.
And all of that was still happening.
Wow.
So that weird sense of normalcy at just running parallel to this just catastrophic sweep of emotion. It was in a lot of ways, I've told Kevin many times, I just thought that was really his finest hour. That's what a broadcaster does, and that's another difference between TV and the internet.
Yeah. I can totally see that.
Huh.
I'd have to say that, it's funny that since I discovered Ghoulardi is probably my favorite horror host in the world, even though I've never actually watched a single episode of his show.
Yeah. Right. You just
watching Turn Blue and watching like the archival footage I've seen of him and that, he's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was someone dug up a bunch of audio as well because about 20 minutes of hosting exists, about an additional hour of skits and programming exists. Mm-hmm. But then there's someone dug up a bunch of audio, the kid just holding his mic up to the TV. And it is the first, Kevin got it to me last year, and it was the first example I ever heard of any of the Laurel Goulardi and Hardy show at all.
Right.
So to me, that was legendary.
Wow.
And there was nothing existed. It just was, and then suddenly this audio pops up. And if anything, this afternoon it's a kid's show.
Yeah.
If anything, it's sloppier than what he was doing late night. You hear these long gaps of silence, and then he'd like be calling somebody from off camera, just, hey, Rick, come here a minute. So what's that thing that it was all about just hanging with him.
Yeah.
That's what, and that, I think it was like why his show was so great, because it really was just hanging with Goulardi.
Yeah.
He wasn't doing a show. He was, you came, hey, he just happened to be there. How you doing? And then he's just off, whatever's on his mind.
Yep. You're just hanging out with Ernie Anderson, which is awesome in and of itself.
Yeah, and I've often told Kevin too that, he does a lot of skits and he calls his bits and things like that, and they're a real mixed bag. He'll be the first to tell you, but they're a real mixed bag. But when he opens the mail, and he just starts riffing on letters and things that people have sent him and stuff like that, I'm in tears, just laughing, because and I tell him, I said that, in those moments you are closer to Goulardi than Ron Sweet ever was. What you're doing is really much closer to what Ernie Anderson was doing.
Right.
It's he captures that same sort of hanging out vibe that which is tough to get sometimes. You have to be really relaxed and confident, and at the same time, you do have to care about what you're doing. And it's a tricky balance.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Wow. Anyway, so I have to get dinner, I'm afraid. So, but no, I mean, I'd actually really like to keep talking, but unfortunately, dinner's calling.
No, man, dinner takes priority. Period.
Yeah, but thanks again, Michael. This has been a fantastic show, and it's been great to get to know you and talk to you. Yeah.
Hey, same here, guys. I really, really appreciate it and really enjoyed talking over you.
And that's the end of our discussion we had with Michael Monahan about horror hosts. It really was an amazing chat, and we hope to have Michael back again to discuss one of his other passions, the super spy genre. Until then, happy Halloween, and tune in next week for a chat with Jack Ward about the true nature of nerdliness. Stay nerdly. Good night, folks. Thanks for listening to the show. If you'd like to hear more or join the conversation, come visit us at obeythedna.com. You can also find us on iTunes or whatever fine podcast site forgot to lock their back door. So until next time, remember that to master the nerdly arts takes time, practice, and enough Coca-Cola to drop a rhino. See ya! Come on over and join the conversation at obeythedna.com, where you will find show notes and more.